I gave him 20 years of my life, then he left me for someone younger. But guess what? Now I get half his pension every single month. This isn't a story about heartbreak, it's a story about quiet power. I found the papers on a Thursday. A thick envelope sat waiting on the kitchen counter, right where I usually left the grocery list. It had his handwriting on it, neat, deliberate, but colder than I remembered. Inside were two things: the divorce petition and something called a Qualified Domestic Relations Order, QDRO for short. It took me a few minutes to understand what it meant. I'd never seen those letters before, but the message was clear enough. He was leaving me, and he wanted to settle everything, including his pension. My name is Helen Saunders. I'm 52 years old, and up until that morning, I thought my marriage had cracks, but not fractures. I thought a little time, a little patience would set things straight. We had built a quiet life. Too quiet, maybe, but it was ours. Or so I thought. We had been married for 20 years. I'd helped him build that pension. I was the one who made sure his shirts were pressed before conferences, who kept the house quiet while he prepped for late-night calls. I packed his lunch some days, his suitcase on others, and when our daughter got sick in second grade, I stepped back from my full-time job to care for her so he wouldn't have to slow down. But there it was, in print. After 2 decades of being his home base, I was being reduced to paperwork. I sat down at the table and just stared at the words. My tea went cold. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was numb. He'd been distant for months, maybe longer, but I kept making excuses. Work stress, travel fatigue, the gray patch in his beard that had started to spread. But deep down, I knew. I just hadn't wanted to see it. That night, I didn't cry. I cleaned, I wiped the counters, did the dishes, folded towels, anything to keep my hands busy. But when I lay down, alone in the bed we used to share, the silence pressed against me like a second blanket. He'd moved out quietly already a week before, said it was temporary, said he needed space, and now I understood. He hadn't needed space. He needed distance from the life we'd built, from the version of me that had given up too much. The pension line kept replaying in my head. Divided equitably, it said, but nothing about this felt fair. We met when I was 27 and still working in publishing. He was already climbing the corporate ladder, an ambitious financial analyst with a gift for charm and a schedule packed with potential. His name was Mark. He had an easy laugh and a restless energy that felt magnetic back then. I was drawn to him instantly. He made me feel like I was the most important part of his world. In the early years, we were partners in every sense. We split rent, cooked dinners together, made weekend road trips out of nothing. When he started his MBA program, I picked up extra freelance work so he could focus. It's our investment, he said, for our future. And I believed him. We got married when he finished school. I was 30. He had just landed a job with a global finance firm. Good pay, long hours, constant travel. We bought a modest house and made it a home. I kept working part-time at a small press, but slowly everything started shifting toward his career, his goals, his deadlines, his vision. When our daughter Lily was born, I stayed home full-time, just for a while, we said, but a while stretched into years. Preschool turned into PTA, which turned into after-school pickups and tutoring and doctor's appointments. I tried to go back to work when Lily was 9, but it was hard. The publishing industry had changed, and I hadn't kept up. Besides, Mark's schedule was always unpredictable. Someone needed to hold down the fort. He never asked me to give anything up, not directly, but he never stopped me either. I became the buffer between his work and our life. I ran the house like a quiet executive, groceries, bills, family birthdays, keeping track of his mother's prescription refills. I was the reason he never missed a meeting or a flight. And he thrived. Promotions came steadily: senior analyst, director, then VP. By the time he hit 50, he had a corner office, 2 assistants, and a pension plan that looked like a small fortune. I was proud. I really was. But I also started noticing how invisible I'd become. Conversations at dinner turned into monologues, his. He stopped asking about my day. Or worse, he'd ask and then check his phone while I answered. Vacations became business trips with us tagging along. He started wearing cologne I didn't recognize. I found unfamiliar receipts tucked into his briefcase. Still, I told myself we were fine, comfortable, stable. He had stress, that's all. We were just tired. Everyone our age was tired. But deep down, I knew. I'd started to disappear in my own life. One night, I brought up the idea of me going back to school, a part-time certificate program, nonprofit management, just to have something of my own again. He didn't even look up from his laptop. At your age, he said. That stayed with me. So did the time he said, I can't do everything, Helen, when I asked if he could take Lily to her piano recital, as if I hadn't been doing everything for years. I used to dream about starting a small press of my own, nothing big, just something meaningful. But those dreams had gotten packed away like old holiday decorations, still there, just dusty and forgotten. And then came the distance. More business trips, shorter phone calls, fewer touches. I'd reach for his hand in bed and find only cool sheets. When he moved out, he said it was temporary. He said he needed space. But I already knew. Temporary is what he'd made me. He had built his world around his ambitions, and I had built mine around him. Now he was walking away, and all I had was the paperwork. After Mark moved out, I kept the house exactly the same. His shoes stayed by the door. His razor still sat in the medicine cabinet. I wasn't ready to erase him. Not yet. That kind of silence felt too loud. The first week he called once, said he was figuring things out, that he needed clarity. I asked if there was someone else. He paused, then said, "This isn't about anyone but me." That was enough of an answer. I didn't tell Lily the truth right away. She was 17, smart, intuitive, but I still tried to protect her. "Dad's taking some space," I said. "He's working through a few things." She looked at me with those clear, steady eyes of hers and just said, "Okay." She didn't believe me, and honestly, I didn't believe me either. The hardest part wasn't that he left. It was realizing how thoroughly I had disappeared from his story long before he packed his bags. I started seeing things clearly, how often he dismissed my ideas, how his silence had grown louder over the years, how we had slowly become just him, and I had gone from partner to prop, the invisible scaffolding holding up a life that didn't include me anymore. I found a credit card statement he forgot to redirect, dinners for 2, hotels I'd never been to. The names didn't matter. It was the pattern that spoke. I wasn't surprised. I was just hollow. One night, around 2 a.m., I found myself staring at the pension paperwork again, that QDRO. I had Googled it so many times, I practically memorized the definition: a legal order required to divide retirement benefits in divorce. It meant I was entitled to a portion of his retirement, what he had earned while I was home keeping everything else running. At first, it felt like charity, like he was tossing me scraps after a 20-year feast, but the more I read, the more I understood. This wasn't a gift. It was mine, legally, morally, strategically. And then something shifted. That was the night I stopped crying. I booked a consultation with a family lawyer the next morning. Her name was Teresa, calm, sharp, patient. She listened more than she spoke. When I told her about the pension, she nodded slowly. "You've been out of the workforce for how long?" she asked. I told her, 15 years, give or take. "Then we're going to make sure you leave this marriage with everything you're entitled to." She didn't say it like a threat. She said it like a fact, and I believed her. From there, I began to rebuild, not loudly, not with rage, but with focus. I started taking online courses, project management, bookkeeping. I'd always handled our household finances, and it turned out I was good at it, better than I gave myself credit for. At night, I journaled, not about him, but about me, who I'd been before, who I wanted to be now. I wrote without censorship, I didn't owe anyone softness anymore. The fights we used to have played back in my head, and they sounded different now. Sharper, more lopsided. He used to say, "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," and I'd go quiet. But I did understand. I just never got the same grace in return. He would say, "This house would fall apart without me." And I would look around at the clean laundry, the packed lunches, the child asleep upstairs, and bite my tongue. I stopped biting my tongue. The day he emailed me to negotiate terms, I replied with 2 words: speak to counsel. He was shocked. I could feel it through the silence. He called me that night, asked if we could handle things amicably. I said, "We are. That's what the law is for." For the first time in years, I had nothing to lose by telling the truth. It's strange how powerful silence can feel when it's yours and not something imposed on you. I stopped explaining myself to people. I didn't tell the neighbors why Mark's car wasn't in the driveway anymore. I didn't explain the absence of his name at dinner parties or on birthday cards. I let people wonder, and in that quiet space, I started reclaiming something that had been buried: my agency. The legal process was slow but deliberate. Teresa, my attorney, handled the technical parts. She filed the QDRO motion. She subpoenaed his financials. She built a case that made it impossible for him to minimize my role in our marriage. But the real work? That was emotional, internal, private. I started every morning with a notebook and a question. What do I want today? Not what he needed, not what Lily needed, me. Some days the answer was simple: a quiet walk, a strong cup of coffee. Other days it was more complicated: courage, resilience, the strength to not respond to his texts that danced between charm and guilt. He started to panic as soon as the financials became real. Mark had built an identity around being the provider. Now that identity was cracking. "You're trying to destroy me," he said once over email. No, I wasn't. I was just refusing to be destroyed. We reached the financial mediation stage 6 months after he served the papers. That was the first time I saw him in person since he moved out. He looked older, thinner, tired in a way that money couldn't fix. I wore gray slacks and a navy blouse, plain, professional, and sharper than I used to dress when I was just his wife. He didn't meet my eyes right away. The mediator walked us through the assets: home equity, savings, stocks, and then we got to the pension. Teresa didn't flinch. "Mrs. Saunders is entitled to 50% of all retirement contributions made during the marriage," she said, her voice calm. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but the numbers spoke for themselves. 20 years of marriage, 18 years of his employer's pension contributions, made possible because I was home with the child, the house, the life. "She's never even worked full-time," he muttered, not to me, but to the table. I looked at him, steady. "That was the deal, Mark. You chased the career. I held up everything else." He didn't respond. The court approved the QDRO 3 weeks later. The pension was officially split. Half would be rerouted into a retirement account under my name. I wouldn't touch it for years, but that wasn't the point. The point was, I now owned part of the future he thought he was building alone. And I wasn't finished rebuilding mine. I used part of the divorce settlement to enroll in a nonprofit finance certification. I picked up part-time consulting work through a friend of a friend, helping small charities with budgeting and grant applications. It was quiet work, unflashy, but it was mine. I rented a small office downtown with a window and a door that locked. The first time I put my name on a contract, Helen Saunders, financial consultant, I cried in the parking lot. Not because I was sad, but because I had been invisible for so long, I forgot what it felt like to see my name in print. Lily noticed the difference too. She started asking me for advice, not just as her mom, but as a woman. She saw me standing up for myself and quietly did the same in her own life. The ripple effect was real. Mark and I no longer spoke unless it was necessary. The last time I saw him, he dropped off a box of old photo albums and some winter coats I'd left in the closet. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the person standing at the door, And in a way, he didn't, because I had stopped performing the version of myself that made his life easy. I was no longer the behind the scenes character in his story. I was the author of my own. The letter arrived on a Tuesday this time. It was from the pension plan administrator. Just a plain envelope, no drama. But inside, it carried a weight that stopped me mid-step. I opened it slowly, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd once read the divorce papers. Transfer completed, it said. Just like that. No exclamation point, no emotional punctuation, but I felt something shift in me. I logged into the retirement portal, a site I'd never had access to before, and saw it there. A new account, my name, my balance, years of deposits and compound interest and growth, now split down the middle. A number I used to think of as his was now legally mine. And with that came something I didn't expect: peace. I had imagined this moment so many times, rehearsed clever comebacks, played out courtroom dramas in my head, imagined Mark's face when he realized I wasn't going to be walked over. But when the moment finally came, it was quiet. Just numbers on a screen. No audience, no applause, just clarity. I sat there, still, letting it all wash over me. 20 years of marriage, 15 years of unpaid labor, all the nights I stayed up with a sick child so he could sleep before a meeting, all the weekends I skipped outings because someone had to prep the school lunches and check the gutters. It had all led to this. Not revenge, not really. Recognition. The pension wasn't about the money, it was about being seen. That night, I made dinner for myself, just me. I didn't default to what Lily liked or what Mark preferred. I made roasted salmon with lemon and fennel, poured a glass of white wine, and set the table for one. I lit a candle, not out of romance, but ritual, a way to mark the moment. Halfway through the meal, I got a text from Mark. Hope we can move forward peacefully. No hard feelings. I didn't reply. Peace, I'd learned, wasn't something he could give me. It was something I had to create for myself. I saved that pension letter in a fireproof box along with my birth certificate and the deed to the car I now owned in full. Proof of ownership, not just of assets, but of my life. There were a few moments I'll never forget, not because they were dramatic, but because they were quiet and final in a way that echoed deeper than any argument could. One was the day I cleaned out his side of the closet. It had been 6 months since the court order, and his old dress shirts still hung there, wrapped in dry cleaner's plastic. I took each one down carefully, folded it, and placed it in a donation box. Not out of spite, out of closure. At the back of the closet, I found a tie I had given him during his first promotion, navy silk with tiny silver dots. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding it in my hands, and I let myself feel everything: grief, relief, anger, pride. I didn't cry. I just breathed through it. Then I placed the tie in the box, closed the lid, and carried it to the trunk of my car. When I dropped it off at the donation center, I felt 10 pounds lighter. Another moment came when I saw the pension deposit reflected in my own bank records. A monthly amount, modest but real, with my name attached to it. It wasn't about the dollar figure, it was about what it represented. It was validation for the unpaid labor I had carried for 2 decades, a kind of quiet compensation. I had contributed immeasurably to his success. And now, for the first time, that contribution was being accounted for in the real world, not just in my memory. And then there was the moment with Lily. She had just turned 18. We were sitting on the back porch, sipping tea on a cool spring night. She said, "You seem different lately. Lighter, stronger." I looked at her and smiled. I think I finally figured out how to stop disappearing. She nodded, understanding more than her age should have allowed. "I saw what you went through. I won't settle for that," she said. That was the moment I knew I had truly broken the cycle, not just for myself, but for her too. These scenes weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Because true power doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it shows up quietly, through folded shirts, steady bank deposits, and a daughter learning how to name her worth. I live differently now. Not louder, not flashier, just more intentionally. The house is smaller, the calendar is quieter, but everything in my life has my fingerprints on it, not someone else's. I started a financial literacy workshop for women in transition, divorcees, widows, caregivers stepping back into the workforce. It started with 5 women in a library basement. Now we meet in a sunny room downtown with real coffee and name tags. Every time I teach them how to read a retirement statement or file a QDRO, I think about that night I sat frozen at my kitchen table, staring at the papers Mark left behind. I think about how far I've come, not away from that moment, but through it. People sometimes ask if I regret those 20 years, if I feel like I lost something I can never get back. And the truth is, I did lose things: time, energy, opportunities, but I also found things I didn't expect to: resilience, quiet courage, and a version of myself that can stand alone without resentment or apology. Mark and I don't speak anymore except through lawyers when needed. I don't wish him harm, but I don't miss him either. What I missed all those years was me. Now I see her again, in the mirror, in the way I carry myself into rooms, in the calm steadiness with which I navigate the world. I've stopped waiting to be recognized. I recognize myself, and I no longer see that pension as a souvenir from a failed marriage. I see it as a symbol, a quiet monthly reminder that even when I wasn't seen, I was still building something. That every load of laundry, every lunch packed, every career I deferred had value. That I have value, and no one can take that away again. If you've ever found yourself starting over after a divorce, a betrayal, or a long silence, I want you to hear this. You are not alone, and your story isn't over. Have you ever had to reclaim something that was quietly taken from you? Maybe not a pension, but your voice, your time, your future? Tell me in the comments, or just say, I see myself in this. Because this space isn't just about revenge, it's about recognition, reinvention, and real power that doesn't need to shout. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real, slow burn stories of transformation. Quiet victories matter, and your next chapter might start right here.